Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior English A, and our objective this morning is to review now some of the Renaissance poems that we have not yet looked at. So our project is starting now on page 306, and we're going to look at Christopher Marlowe's famous little poem, The Passionate Shepherd to His Love, and Sir Walter Raleigh's famous The Nymph's Reply to the Shepherd. These poems, by the way, put a note to yourself at 3A. The poems on 306 and 308, they go together. They are intentionally companion reads. Let's first of all point out something that will help you to understand these two poems. You already know this, but I'm going to point it out to you anyway. In Shakespeare's day, let's just call it 1600 to make it easy. In Shakespeare's day, the idea that a guy and a girl would go to a party, the music is pumping, they look across the floor, the dance floor at each other, their eyes lock up, they see each other, they say, "What's up?" Later on, they hook up and they become an item. That idea is completely off the table in 1600. What do you mean it's completely off the table? Dude, Shakespeare wrote the play Romeo and Juliet, and that's how they meet. That's the point I'm making. That's the point I'm making. Wait a minute. You already know that from Romeo and Juliet. When we hear about Juliet for the very first time in that play, it ain't from Romeo. How do we hear about Juliet for the first time in a play Romeo and Juliet? I realize that's 4 years ago, and for some of us that's a long ways back. But, yeah, it ain't got nothing to do with Romeo. It's a cat named Paris who's roughly 30 years older than Juliet, showing up to marry her. He's never met her. He's never met her. He could care less what she looks like. Why? Because marriage had absolutely nothing to do with what you looked like. Juliet's father is a little bit liberal at the beginning of the play when he says two things. One, she's too young. To which his response is, "What are you talking about? There's like all kinds of girls that are married by that age." The mother of Juliet will point that out as well. She will say, "I already had my first child by the time I was your age." Happened all the time. All the time. But the second observation Juliet's father says is, "Why don't you woo her or get to know her?" Our word today would be date her. That is to say, introduce yourself to her. "I'm going to have this party coming up. Why don't you show up at the party? You can meet my daughter." At the party, she's not interested, of course, in Paris because Juliet meets the fair Romeo, who's really good at talking on the dance floor. Wait a minute. How does that whole thing end up? About two young people choosing their own mates. Yeah. That's the whole point of Romeo and Juliet. For those of us who know how to read that play, that is not a love play. That is not a love play. It is a play about politics and what happens when old people let young people make up their mind about who it is they should like. Of course, today, that whole notion of arranged marriages is for us a little bit old-fashioned, and we say, you know, look, if I'm going to marry somebody, it's going to be because I want that person, etc., etc. That is not Shakespeare's day, but the idea is starting to open up. So in the play, in the poems that we'll be looking at, you have a guy trying to use language to convince the girl to do something that, you know, maybe she's kind of reluctant to do or whatever. That is to say, "Can you please think about being my girl, being my wife or whatever," okay? But there's a problem. In Shakespeare's day, you have money by virtue of your class. In other words, I don't mean class as in are you in 303 at Worland High School. What do I mean when I use that term class like that? Your social class meaning what? There's upper class, there's lower class, and then there's that middle class. Got me? If you're in the lower class in Shakespeare's day, there is no way you're allowed to mess around with the upper class. In Romeo and Juliet, by the way, that's an interesting thing because both Romeo and Juliet come from upper class families. Both of their daddies have their own parking spot at the country club. So that's to say, it's okay for them to kind of be together on that count. It's just that their two families, the Montagues and the Capulets, hate each other's guts. They're both upper class families, though, if you got my drift, all right? In the poem we're about to look at, you've got a cat from the lowest of the lower class. He's just a poor shepherd. He has nothing. He not only doesn't have any money, he ain't got no job. What do you mean? He's a shepherd. He ain't got no job. You hear what I'm saying? There's no class in terms of there's no prestige. But he wants the girl. So he's going to try to talk the girl into coming to be his wife, and the way he's going to do it is to make her promises of things he'll give her. Now, of course, this sounds like some high schools where seniors try to get freshman girls. Of course, we're familiar with that project, aren't we? The older guy talking to the younger girl, using language to try to convince her of something that maybe she normally wouldn't do. We're familiar with that concept. Shakespeare's day, we're going to play that game, and we're going to see it here with Christopher Marlowe. Come live with me, and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove. By the way, let's just point out the rhythms here. Come live with me and be my love, and we shall all the pleasures prove. Do you see it? Right? But notice we don't have ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. Do you see it? We don't have pentameter, we have iambic, don't we? Right? Okay? That valleys, groves, hills, and fields, woods or steepy mountains yields. And we will sit upon the rocks. He can't take her to downtown London and show her off in new dresses. Instead, he says, come on, I'll show you the movie of sitting on the rocks next to Tinsleep Lake, that kind of thing. That's all he can afford. That's all he can do. Seeing the shepherd feed his flocks by shallow rivers to whose falls melodious birds sing madrigals. I don't have enough money to bring in a chorus, but I can have birds sing for us, but that's just because they're in the trees where we'll be sitting. And I'll make thee a bed of roses. I can't give you a house, but I can at least lay some roses on the ground for you. And 1,000 fragrant posies. I'll put flowers all around for you. A cap of flowers, a kirtle embroidered with the leaves of myrtle. In other words, what's his point? Come and live with me, and I'll give you the only thing I can give to you. That is to say, the stuff from the fields where I watch my sheep. That's it. Now, this is often seen as an attempt to try to say to the girl, money doesn't matter. I've heard students say this before. Oh, love is more important than money. I don't care. As long as I'm in love, we'll fall in love and get married. To which, of course, we have a reply. Now, that reply is Sir Walter Raleigh's on page 308. Raleigh is a really interesting cat. Really interesting cat. I mean, this guy has done it all. Ultimately, we think he probably was a lover of Queen Elizabeth's. He got a little bit too close, he got a little bit too caught up in the intrigue, and ultimately he got his head chopped off. But in the meantime, he does all kinds of interesting things like win wars for England, settle some of the colonies, for example, in the new Americas. This guy is a really interesting guy. He, however, had an ironic reply to the shepherd. In other words, he asked this question, because we don't know it in Marlowe's poem. We don't know how the girl replies. So Raleigh makes up a response, which is, how do we say it politely, somewhat skeptical of the boy's promises. So you got a guy making promises. No, just come and be with me, and all these amazing things are going to happen. And the girl, here called a nymph, of course a nymph is short for mermaid. That is to say, a young girl, right? And we're going to hear this word again when we study the play Hamlet. Here's her reply to the shepherd. People love to then read these poems side by side because Raleigh's response, that is to say the girl's response, is a little bit, for your notes, ironic. Ironic. That is to say, she's going to go, really? You're going to give me flowers and I get to watch sheep instead of a mansion. That's what you're giving? Let's point out, it's pretty easy in all the film versions of Romeo and Juliet to see just how spoiled Juliet is. Would you agree with me? Yeah. She's one spoiled kid, right? She gets anything she wants. She goes anywhere she wants. She tells nurses what to do, right? She throws down on her daddy and her mom, right? Okay, this is Juliet. That's an upper class woman. You get a sense here that Raleigh's going to say, the shepherd's probably trying to land some upper class girl. This is how she's going to respond. If all the world and love were young, and truth in every shepherd's tongue, these pretty pleasures might me move to live with thee and be thy love. Ouch. What'd she say in the first stanza?
You are a liar.
Ouch. You're a guy, which means you're a liar. That is to say, I can hear what you're saying to me, and it all sounds great, but it all sounds like blah, 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 blah. Why? Because you're a guy, and that means one thing. You tell stories to get what you want. That is to say, you're a guy. I ain't putting up with it. Whoa. How would you, what's the tone of this right from the start?
Kind of snappy.
It's really snappy. It's like, I don't think so. Not in this place. No, you know, that kind of thing, right? Okay? Only it gets better. Take a look at what she says next. Time drives the flocks from field to fold when rivers rage and rocks go cold and Philomel becometh dumb. The rest complains of cares to come. She says, yeah, we're young, but we ain't gonna be young forever. And yeah, it's spring, but it ain't spring forever either. Laying on a bed of roses sounds nice when it's in the middle of July, but what about when it's in the middle of January? What are you going to give to me then? Yeah, that's what I thought. You're interested in me in a bed of roses now, but I'm interested in what I'm going to get from you when it's the middle of February, and the answer is that big fat 0. Of course, there's been one or two, you know, can we say it politely, one or two young ladies at Worland High School that have had to learn the hard way that guys are really good in the moment with making all kinds of promises about what it is they're going to give and how much they're going to love and how long they're going to be there, only to find out later it was all made up and they changed their mind after they got what they wanted. I mean, this is not new information here, though. You got a young lady who's able to see it before it happens and say, no, I don't think so. Look at the third stanza. By the way, there were one or two guys that didn't like this poem very much. They thought Raleigh had kind of sold out the guys, if you will, right? The flowers do fade in wanton fields, to wayward winter reckoning yields a honey tongue, a heart of gall. Whoa, did you see it? Guys can talk with a honey tongue, but girls can have a heart of gall, sourness. In other words, guys are really good at talking while girls get their hearts broken, if you will, right? Is fancy spring, but sorrows fall. Thy gowns, thy shoes, thy beds of roses, thy cap, thy kirtle, and thy posy soon break, soon wither, soon forgotten, in folly ripe and reason rotten. In other words, yeah, everything you promised to me goes away as fast as it comes, and Mama didn't raise no fool. That's kind of the tone here, right? To the young girl's credit, she says, yeah, I know you're handsome and hot and all those kinds of things, and you're a really good talker, but the bottom line is after you get what you want from me, you're going to bolt and I'm going to be without what I need, and homie, don't roll that way. I ain't playing that game with you, that kind of thing, you see. To which you can imagine that, you know, this poor shepherd guy's kind of standing there like, what? I thought I could, like, talk you into whatever, you know, and she's like, nah, I don't think so. Thy belt of straw and ivy buds, thy coral clasp and amber studs, all these in me no means can move to come to thee and be thy love. But could youth last? See, here it is, right? Could youth last and love still breed? Had joys no date nor age no need? Then these delights my mind might move to live with thee and be thy love. There are some who argue that Raleigh is presenting a really conservative view of marriage that says the following: if you marry because you are in love, you are a fool. You are a fool. Here's why. You marry when you're in love when you're young. Of course, when you're young, you're stupid. That is to say, you don't know the world. You are so certain of A, B, C, whatever, right? But what happens over 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? The answer is, you ain't young no more. And usually what happens is you fall out of love, and then there's this little word they call divorce. And then, of course, people break up, and then they go do somebody else. The conservative argument says, why don't you let adults make the decision about who it is you should be with, because adults know what you do not. Now, 18 to 25-year-olds hate this reasoning because they think they're all grown up. But if a third grader were to sit down with you and say, sit down, I got to talk to you. You got some information I need to tell you. You would have a tendency to say, whoa, third grader. First of all, I just need you to shut up because you're third and I'm 12th grader. And second of all, I don't need you telling me what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what to do because you're stupid and I'm not. Right? Now, what's funny about that is that every 12th grader I know, I teach, they understand and resonate with that view. They are not ready to sit down and listen to what some third grader has to say about the world because they say, dude, I know the world, and you're a fool. Sit down. I'll tell you about the world. Right? But then we have a tendency to marvel and turn around and talk to adults in the same fashion. Sit down. I need to tell you what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to... And we're stunned when the adult says, whoa. Back that train, choo-choo train, way up. You're a fool and a child. I'm going to tell you what the world looks like because you got no clue. And see, we have a tendency to say, I'm all grown up. I've lived 2 decades, 20 whole years. I know everything I need to know, which, of course, a 40-year-old will say, you got no clue what 20 years looks like. Give me a break. Same argument. You can kind of get a sense here that Raleigh is making that argument. That it's a stupid thing to let young people make up their mind about who they can love and who they're going to marry. Because ultimately, 90% of the time, of course statistics prove this, don't they, right? 90% of the time, those marriages do not last. Those relationships do not last. one or two seniors said out loud that, you know what, if I had kind of known this as a freshman, I probably would not have made some of the stupid mistakes I made coming through high school. Whoops. Let's keep going, shall we? Enough of that observation, shall we? Let's go now to Spenser, and let's talk about the Spenserian sonnets of 30 and 75. Now, Edmund Spenser, one of our classic poets, right, who is going to write a number of these sonnets. This one's a funny one. Sonnet 30. Now, you might want to write on your annotations real quick for Sonnet 30, fire and ice. And that will be the easy way to remember this one, okay? Fire and ice, all right? And there's different mnemonics, you know, to try and remember these poems, but that's a simple one, all right? Now, here it is. Spenser's going to say that when you put fire and ice together, one of two things has to happen. If you've got a fire in the Badlands, and you take a whole bunch of ice and dump it on top of the fire, normally what happens to the fire is it goes out, right? Or if you take fire and you put it next to some ice, normally it'll melt the ice. You're right, it'll melt it, turn it into water. He's going to argue, though, love is the opposite. All these poems having to do to some degree with love. Take a look at what he says. My love, his girl, is like to ice and I to fire. So that's a pretty simple word picture, right? I'm fire, she's ice. She's a block of ice, I'm a raging fire. Got me? First line. Second line. How comes it then that this her cold so great is not dissolved through my so hot desire, but harder grows the more I her entreat? Uh-oh, what's he ask? He asks a really interesting question. If I'm fire and she's ice, how come I haven't what? I haven't melted her. It doesn't make any sense. Or, how comes it that my exceeding heat is not delayed by heart-frozen cold, but that I burn much more in boiling sweat and feel my flames augmented, manifold? In other words, you take a bunch of snow, you dump it on top of a fire, normally the fire's going to go out. He says, but when she dumps all the snow on top of my fire just gets hotter. That is to say, when the guy wants the girl and the girl says, no, I don't think so, does it make the guy want the girl less or more? Ironically, it makes the guy want the girl more, right? Okay, that is to say, I don't know, I'll get back to you later, or, you know, I'll return his text in 2 days just so I can mess with his head. You know, that, Judy says this, right? Thanks a lot. You know, that kind of thing, right? Or I'll give him chocolates on Valentine's Day, but not talk to him for 2 days and just see what that does to his little brain. That'll be fun. Yes, yes. He says, how do you explain this fact? He says, really, because she's not responding, she's not answering any of my texts, I should just hang it up and go on to the next girl, but I don't. He says, how do you explain that fact? These are kind of almost rhetorical questions, like, what is wrong with me? I must be some kind of idiot. Keep going. What more miraculous thing may be told? He calls love a miracle. That fire, which all things melts, should harden ice, and ice, which is congealed with senseless cold, should kindle fire by wonderful device. He says, are you ready for this? It seems to suggest that Spenser is suggesting love is unnatural. Natural is you put fire next to ice and it melts it, right? That's natural, right? Or you dump a bunch of ice on top of fire and it goes out. That's natural. But love is the opposite. The less the girl acts like she wants the guy, the more the guy wants the girl. Sometimes it works the opposite way too, right? Guys can pretend to girls like they're not interested. That seems to make the girl want the guy even more. Fascinating. Look at how this one finishes. Such is the power of love in gentle mind, that it can alter all the course of kind. Here the word kind meaning humankind. That is to say, love changes everything. Right? Everything. And this poem seems to suggest we don't got a lot of control over this thing called love. Right? That is to say, once it happens, there's not a lot of controlling it, like, you know, figuring it out. Sonnet 75 of Spenser will work very nicely with Sonnet 18 of Shakespeare. They are companion reads. Here's why. Let me give it to you and then I'll work through it, okay? Sonnet 75 on page 313. Spenser and Shakespeare's speakers in both the poems 75 and 18 say the same thing. After you're dead and gone, you will still be alive. Because I'm going to write a poem about you, and you're going to be remembered forever. All right? Same exact, right? Remember that's what our Sonnet 18 was yesterday, right? You're way better than a summer's day. Remember? You're way better than a summer's day because summer's days don't last. You're going to last forever because of my poem. So long as men can breathe, their eyes can see. So long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Remember, that's the final couplet of 18. Let's take a look at Sonnet 75, all right? One day... by the way, a Spenserian sonnet, as opposed to a Shakespearean sonnet, differ in regards to, not 14 lines, they both have that. Not iambic pentameter, they both have that. They differ in regards to rhyme scheme. Notice that the word, the lines sometimes will differ, or the divisions of the poem in regards to their argument. Take a look at what he says. One day, they're out walking along the beach, the strand, the beach. One day I wrote her name upon the strand, the beach. But came the waves and washed it away. So he's walking with his girl and he goes, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to write your name on the beach so you'll be remembered. And the wave comes and now all of a sudden what happens to the name that he scratched in the sand? Gone, right? So he says, again, I wrote it with a second hand, but came the tide and made my pains as prey. Second time, wrote her name. Second time, waves come. Then she's going to speak to him and call him, you're an idiot. Vain. You're an idiot. What is wrong with you? Don't you understand? You can write my name over and over in the sand, but every time the waves are going to come and wipe it away, just like death, she says, will ultimately wipe away my name and my body. I mean, it's just the way it is. He will respond by saying, oh, no, no, no. That's not true. Watch this. You can imagine the girl at the time for Spenser's rolling her eyes as he says this. Right? Vain man, said she, that doth in vain essay immortal things so to immortalize. For I myself shall like to this decay, and eke my name be wiped out likewise. In other words, I'm just like, my body is just like the name you wrote on the sand. I'm gonna get wiped out. Not so, quote I. Let baser things devise to die in dust, but you shall live by fame. My verse, your virtues rare, shall eternize, and in the heavens write your glorious name. Whereon as death shall all the world subdue, our love shall live, and later life renew. Oh, you guys are supposed to go, oh. In other words, he says, hey, every time this poem gets read, you're going to be resurrected. You're going to be remembered. Of course, it's always fascinating that, hey, guys, we just did it again. And again, just like Sonnet 18, Spenser kind of does one of these things to the girl. Told you so. Right? Because we still keep reading this poem. It is one of the very popular and anthologized poems. Shakespeare's 18 we've already seen on page 318. Very similar to the sonnet that we just looked at. Sonnet 29. This is a fascinating sonnet because it is another love sonnet, but it tells us something about the cat who wrote Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, and Hamlet. Let's just say it out loud. We usually consider that guy fairly popular and famous. Would you agree with me? But we find out in this poem that Shakespeare himself had his doubts about his abilities. No kidding. Watch this. When in disgrace, with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate. Wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope. With what I most enjoy, contented least. Whoa! Now, we have to go back and backtrack a little bit. But Shakespeare's basically going to say, when I realize just how wretched a life I have because I'm a crappy writer without any buddies. I have no friends. And I'm a garbage writer. Whoa! This is the cat that wrote Romeo and Juliet, the entire play in iambic pentameter that would later become one of the greatest plays of all time. This is the guy that wrote Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be soliloquy that would be classified as the greatest single set of lines ever written. And yet, this gives some comfort to artists. During his own lifetime, it's fairly clear he had some serious self-doubts about who he was and what he'd done. He says, when I'm in disgrace with fortune, I don't have any good luck. And I all alone beweep my outcast state. I've got the worst luck of anybody alive. And I trouble deaf heaven. Notice he prays to God, but God in heaven is deaf. With my bootless cries. And look upon myself and curse my fate. This is Shakespeare. This is Shakespeare, who will become the most famous writer of all time, who during his own lifetime says, I'm a nobody and it sucks. I hate it. Wishing me like one to more were rich in hope. Featured like him with friends possessed. I don't have any buddies. Desiring this man's art and that man's scope. I wish I could write like other guys. Whoa, this is Shakespeare saying this, right? With what I most enjoy, contented least. He loves to write, and yet he's not happy with the things that he writes. When all of those things happen, in other words, when I'm having a crappy day, yet, oh, here comes the love part. Yet, in these thoughts myself, almost despairing, happily I think on thee. We can collectively go, oh, right? Happily I think on thee. And then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising, from sullen earth sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered such wealth brings, that then I scorn to change my state with kings. He says, I may die completely poor, completely forgotten, a complete loser, but as long as I've got my girl, you, he says, I'm better than a king. Now that kind of sounds like sappy country lines as well, but, Frederick, it works, right? It works. I mean, he basically says, I may die a nobody, but at least I'll die a nobody with you. Aww. All we need is a guitar riff, and we've got ourselves a song. Is that right? Okay, there it is, right there. See how that works? Okay, so Sonnet 29. Sonnet 16, let's go to it real quickly. Just Sonnet 116. Just to remind, Sonnet 116 is Shakespeare's quintessential view of love as penultimate, as eternal. That is to say, you know true love when you get into terrible situations and you can somehow get out of those situations. Sonnet 130, we've already said, is an interesting sonnet. Shakespeare says, my girl, totally normal in every way, and yet I think she's better than any girl. Why? Because she likes me. That is to say, love is blind, right? Sometimes we can fall in love and our pals will say, dude, have you looked at this person? And you're like, what? He looks great or she looks great. What are you talking about, right? Once you're in love, everything looks awesome, right? It's sometimes after the fact that you go, what was I thinking? You see, right, all of that. We'll not get into that and break any hearts today, all right? Right. All right, do you have any questions for me as we kind of are finishing up? Now, next Tuesday, we will work with the Patriarch Sonnets 90 and 292, and then I believe, Miss Laird, we've covered it all. All right, questions, comments?